The chandelier above the dining table shook when Richard's hand slammed into my shoulder harder than necessary, shoving me down into the chair at the far end. The jolt made the silverware rattle against porcelain, the sound sharp as glass breaking, and for a moment I thought my chest would cave from the humiliation. My name is Clara Whitmore. I am 48 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my family has found ways to remind me that in their eyes I am the weakest link. Tonight, they did not even bother hiding it. "Sit there." Richard barked, his jaw tight, his Rolex catching the light as he pressed me back into the chair. "We don't need your input, just your compliance." He raised his voice louder than the thunder outside, loud enough that every cousin and aunt turned to stare. Vanessa, draped in silk with her wine glass poised like a trophy, laughed under her breath. "Honestly, Richard, don't scare her. Clara's fragile. She hasn't accomplished enough to sit at this table as an equal anyway." She tilted her glass and winked at the others as if humiliating me were sport. My mother's sigh was worse than both their words. From her wheelchair, she looked at me the way she always had, like a disappointment she never learned to conceal. "Your sister is only trying to help Clara. Maybe if you had listened years ago, you wouldn't still be living in those shabby apartments. If you can't contribute money, at least contribute silence." The words lodged in my chest like splinters. Laughter trickled around the table, cousins hiding their smiles behind linen napkins. I could smell the rosemary lamb roast cooling on the platters, hear the clink of crystal, feel the burn in my palms as my nails carved half moons into my skin. My family was feasting not just on food, but on me again, as they always had. Richard leaned closer, so close I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. "Look at you," he sneered, "still carrying that old bag, still driving that rust bucket. Poor Clara, always pretending she's fine when we all know she's not." His voice rose, carrying across the polished oak. "You're pathetic." The room erupted in nervous chuckles. My mother pressed her lips together but said nothing. Vanessa clapped slowly, mock applause. "Bravo, Richard!" She needed to hear it. Something hot surged in my throat, part rage, part memory. I saw myself at 22. Richard's palm cracking against my face when I dared tell our father I would not be a lawyer. That same heat flared now, the old bruise returning in spirit. My breath came ragged, but I forced myself not to flinch. I kept my eyes on the table, tracing the lace runner until I felt the small vibration in my pocket. My phone. A single message glowed across the screen when I slid it under the table. "Ready." Outside, a sound cut through the November air. Faint at first, then heavier, more insistent, the mechanical thunder of rotor blades. The chandelier trembled, the glasses rang. Richard froze his hand, still gripping the back of my chair. "What the hell is that?" he demanded, his voice tight with something he rarely showed fear. Vanessa's wine sloshed as she glanced to the window, panic widening her eyes. "Police reporters." I stood slow and deliberate, pushing back the chair Richard had tried to pin me in. My legs felt steady for the first time all night. My voice did not shake. "No," I said, letting the silence stretch before the next word. "That sound is mine." The words dropped heavier than any insult, heavier than Richard's shove, heavier than the years of being pressed into corners. Around me, the family gawked, their confidence collapsing in real time. The thunder outside swelled until it seemed the roof might split open. For the first time in decades, I was not the one caged in. I was the one holding the door, and the moment that helicopter touched down, they would understand that the balance of power had shifted forever. I was born into the Whitmore family, a dynasty in their own minds, though their wealth was built more on appearances and connections than on any true grit. My father, Charles Whitmore, had been a lawyer of some renown in Boston, respected for his sharp tongue and ruthless tactics in the courtroom. My mother, Margaret, lived to uphold that image, elegant luncheons, country club memberships, and a home filled with antiques that smelled of dust and old pride. From the moment I could walk, I knew my role, smile, obey, and never tarnish the Whitmore name. Richard, my older brother by 7 years, was the crown jewel. He followed our father into law, sharp-suited and sharp-witted, praised at every dinner table. He learned early that cruelty could be mistaken for strength. Teachers who scolded me often received letters from Richard correcting their judgment. Coaches benched me while he smirked from the bleachers. And when I tried to protest, Father would clap Richard on the shoulder and say, "That's leadership, Clara. Learn from your brother." Then came Vanessa, 4 years younger than me, the darling daughter. She inherited Mother's looks, soft blonde hair, and delicate features, and from the start she knew how to use them. While I scraped through high school math and begged for approval, Vanessa breezed through with charm. She married a banker before she was 30, securing her role as the family's trophy child. Her wealth, though not hers by labor, was brandished like a sword against me. And me, I was the middle child, the misfit. I had my father's stubbornness, but none of his approval. When I was 22, standing at this same dining table, I announced that I would not follow the path of law or finance. I had an idea, a dream for technology that could protect people online. The room went silent, then erupted. My father's face darkened. My mother gasped. Richard reached across the table and struck me so hard the taste of copper filled my mouth. I remember the hush after the way Vanessa giggled into her napkin, the way Father said, "That will be the last time you embarrass us with nonsense." That was the night I left this house with nothing but $200 and an old laptop. The years that followed broke me down and built me up again. I rented rooms so small I could touch both walls with my arms. I worked as a waitress by night, a coder by day, sleeping in stolen hours. Twice, I failed my projects, crumbling debts, swallowing me whole. Friends disappeared. A man I thought loved me sneered when he left. "You'll never be more than a starving dreamer." But even as I broke, I learned. Even as I fell, I built the foundations of something stronger. Meanwhile, the Whitmores pretended I didn't exist. Invitations to weddings and holidays accidentally never reached me. When I tried to visit, Richard would block the door with a smile too wide. "We thought you were busy with your little experiments." Vanessa posted pictures of her Paris trips tagging our mother, but never me. And Mother herself, when she called, would sigh into the phone. "If only you had been like your siblings. Life would be easier." Now, 25 years later, Father was gone. Richard had stepped into his shoes as head of the family, Vanessa had perfected her role as a socialite, and Mother was fragile after a broken hip. They summoned me here tonight for what they called a family meeting. In truth, it was never a meeting. It was a tribunal, and I was always the defendant. I looked around at the table at the faces that had shaped my scars. Richard with his power suits and hollow eyes. Vanessa with her diamonds and disdain. Mother with her conditional love. They thought they knew me, still the girl they had slapped down, silenced, mocked into exile. What they did not know, what they could never imagine, was that the girl who left with nothing had become a woman with everything. And tonight in this room, dripping with chandeliers and hypocrisy, they would learn just how costly their cruelty had been. When I left my family's house that night, the slap still burning on my face, I had nothing but fury and a conviction that I would prove them wrong. I moved into a basement apartment where mold crept along the walls, the air always damp, and the only window faced a brick alley. I took a waitress job at a greasy diner, 12-hour shifts with aching feet, then went home to code on my battered laptop until dawn. Sleep became a luxury I could not afford. Ramen noodles, day-old bread, instant coffee, that was my diet for nearly 2 years. But every keystroke was a rebellion, every late-night line of code a whisper to myself. I will not die their failure. The first company I tried to build collapsed within 18 months. I had investors, or so I thought, until one pulled out, claiming my product was too ambitious for a woman on her own. Debts piled so high, I sold my blood plasma twice a week to keep the lights on. My landlord threw me out when I missed rent, and I spent one winter sleeping in the back of my friend's rusted Honda Civic, huddled beneath 3 coats while snow sealed the doors shut. My family never knew. I refused to call them, refused to give them the satisfaction of hearing me beg. The second attempt ended worse. I partnered with a man I thought I could trust, someone who promised to help me scale. Instead, he siphoned money from the account and disappeared. The company dissolved in weeks, leaving me with creditors at the door. I remember the night I sat on the fire escape staring down at the city street, wondering if it would be easier to let gravity solve my problems. But something inside me hardened. I thought of Richard's sneer, Vanessa's giggle, my father's cold voice saying I was an embarrassment. I clenched the rail and told myself, not like this, not for them. So I started again quietly alone. I refined an idea I had scribbled in old notebooks, a cybersecurity platform for small businesses, affordable but impenetrable. I called it SecureLink. For years, I built it brick by brick, teaching myself cryptography testing algorithms until my fingers ached. By day, I took temp jobs: receptionist, cashier, delivery driver. By night, I wrote code until my eyes blurred. I lived in silence, but the silence was power. No one could sabotage what they did not see. There were moments when I nearly broke. My laptop fried once, sparks shooting as the screen went black, and I thought my heart would stop. I screamed into the empty room until my throat gave out. But I saved, I repaired, I kept moving. I lost friends, I lost lovers, but I did not lose the fire. Then, in my late 30s, the breakthrough came. A small Boston accounting firm hired me to secure their client files after a breach. Within weeks, their system was tighter than Fort Knox. Word spread. A hospital signed on, then a chain of banks. Within 2 years, SecureLink wasn't just a project, it was a fortress trusted across the Northeast. Venture capitalists circled. I refused the first 3 certain they only wanted to gut me. But the fourth, a woman named Denise Harrington, saw me, truly saw me. She invested not just in the product, but in me. The company exploded. By the time I was 45, SecureLink had 50 employees, a downtown office, and contracts worth millions. Then came the acquisition offer, $120 million from a global security giant. My lawyers nearly fell over at the number. I took it, but with one condition: I retained 30% ownership and full creative control. Overnight, my name appeared in trade magazines, my inbox filled with congratulations from people who once ignored me. But not once did my phone ring with a call from my family. They had no idea. And I liked it that way. I lived simply, still rented a modest apartment, drove an old sedan. I carried the same worn leather bag to remind myself where I began. Let them think I was poor. Let them laugh at my shoes, mock my clothes. Every insult only sweetened the truth I held close. I could buy and sell every one of them 10 times over. I funneled money quietly into a trust, not just for myself, but for causes I believed in. Women fleeing abusive homes, students who needed scholarships in computer science, small businesses trying to survive cyber attacks. I lived in shadows, yes, but shadows of my choosing. And all the while, I kept one thought alive like a flame in my chest. One day they will see. That day arrived the week my mother fell and broke her hip. Richard called me, his voice slick with false concern. "Mother wants to see you. We're having a family meeting. It's important you come." For a moment, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to hang up to let them stew in their arrogance forever. But another part of me, the part still carrying scars, knew this was the moment I had been building toward for 25 years. I said yes, and as I packed my bag that night, slipping in not only my phone, but a folder of documents worth more than their entire lives combined, I smiled to myself. They thought they summoned me. They had no idea I had been waiting for this summons all along. The Whitmore house had not changed in decades. The bricks were still scrubbed to a self-satisfied shine. The iron gate still heavy with pretension, the long drive lined with oak trees imported from Europe, or so Father used to boast. I pulled my old sedan onto the gravel and felt the weight of memories pressing down like storm clouds. Every stone of that house had heard me cry once. Tonight it would hear me roar. Inside, the smell was the same polished mothballs and the faint sweetness of roses Mother insisted on keeping in cut crystal vases. My footsteps echoed across the marble foyer. Family portraits loomed from the walls: Father with his gavel, Richard in his first tailored suit, Vanessa in her debutante gown. My photograph was nowhere to be seen. Richard greeted me at the door to the dining room, spreading his arms as though he were hosting royalty. His eyes, however, scanned my shoes, my plain coat, my bag, calculating how to turn each detail into an insult. "Clara," he said smoothly, "you made it. We were just saying we weren't sure you'd have reliable transportation." Behind him, Vanessa sat at the table, already sipping wine. She wore a sapphire necklace that caught the chandelier's glow, dazzling, purposeful. "Oh, Clara," she said with mock warmth. "I'm glad you're here. I brought you a little gift." She reached beneath the table and placed a glossy shopping bag in front of my chair. Inside was a discount store sweater, the tag still hanging. It's just something simple. You've always needed help choosing clothes. The room chuckled. My knuckles whitened around the strap of my bag, but I said nothing. I slid into the chair, the same chair I had been forced into as a child, the one closest to the door, farthest from Respect. Mother entered last wheeled in by a nurse. Her hair was thin, now her face lined, but her gaze retained its sharp edge. She looked me over and pursed her lips. "You look tired, Clara. Life has been difficult for you, hasn't it?" The words were a blade cloaked in concern. I wanted to laugh, but my throat closed instead. Richard cleared his throat, commanding attention as always. He clicked his laptop and the screen lit up with slides, charts, bullet points, numbers. "We're here to discuss Mother's care. She deserves the best. The Heritage Home costs $15,000 a month. Vanessa and I will cover most of it, of course. Clara, perhaps you can contribute something." He let the word hang like a taunt. $500. If that's too much, you could visit weekly to clean. That would be useful. Laughter again, softer this time, but still poisonous. Vanessa smirked into her wine. "That's fair, Richard. Clara was never one for big gestures. Small acts suit her." I felt the old fire rise, the same that had carried me through cold apartments and long nights of code. My hands trembled in my lap, but my face remained calm. I thought of the folder in my bag, the documents inside the phone in my pocket. Not yet, I told myself. Timing was everything. They continued without me speaking over me as if I were furniture. Numbers, plans, decisions, all made as though I had no voice. Mother sighed at intervals, wringing her hands, whispering about sacrifice. Vanessa laughed at her own jokes. Richard dictated as though he were king. But I was not the girl they remembered. I was not the woman they thought they had broken. As the meeting dragged on, as their arrogance filled the room like smoke, I held onto a single truth that pulsed beneath my skin. Every insult tonight was tender, and when the spark came, the blaze would consume them all. Richard's voice filled the dining room as though he were delivering a closing argument in court. He strutted back and forth behind Mother's chair, clicking through his slides while everyone else nodded dutifully. His tone dripped with authority, the kind he had learned from Father, cold, dismissive, absolute. "The Heritage Home has private suites, full-time medical staff, and the reputation Mother deserves," Richard declared, stabbing a finger at the screen. "It is $15,000 a month. Vanessa and I will shoulder the majority. Clara!" He turned to me, lips curling. "We're realistic about what you can provide. $500 perhaps, maybe some weekend cleaning visits." "That's appropriate." A ripple of amusement swept through the room. One cousin snorted into his napkin. Vanessa smirked and added, "Oh, Richard, don't burden her. She can manage less if needed. Maybe she could cook for Mother once a week. Homemade soup, Clara." "You must be good at something simple." Heat rushed to my face, but I kept my voice steady. "So that's my role, maid service." Richard slammed the laptop shut with a crack that made the chandelier quiver. He leaned across the table until his breath stung my cheek. "Don't start, Clara. We've tolerated your defiance for decades. Tonight you will do as you're told. This isn't about you." His hand clamped down on the table near mine, his knuckles whitening. For a moment, I thought he might strike me again the way he had years ago. Mother's weak voice broke in. "Enough, Richard. She means well, but she's not capable of more. Let her agree and be done." She looked at me, then her eyes full of weary pity, as if I were a child caught playing dress-up. "Clara, please, don't make this harder." I remembered every time she'd said that to me. "Don't make this harder when Richard stole my allowance. Don't make this harder when Vanessa mocked me at school. Don't make this harder when Father raised his hand." The phrase was less comfort than command. Stay silent, swallow the pain, keep the peace. But tonight I would not. I straightened in my chair. "No," I said. The word cracked through the room like lightning. Silence followed, heavy and stunned. Richard blinked, then laughed harshly. "No, you don't get to say no, Clara. This family decides, not you." Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Always dramatic. You should be grateful we even asked." I reached into my bag and set my phone on the table. "You've mistaken me for the woman I used to be. That woman is gone." Richard sneered, leaning closer. "And who are you now?" "A nobody who can't even buy proper shoes. You'll sit here and nod, or so help me." His hand shot toward my arm, fingers tightening around my wrist. Gasps fluttered across the room. Vanessa murmured Richard, but her smile betrayed her enjoyment. Pain shot through my arm, but I did not flinch. I held his gaze. You don't scare me anymore. Then I pressed the screen of my phone. One message sent, one signal. Outside, the night erupted with sound. At first, a distant tremor, then the pounding thrum of rotor blades splitting the sky. The windows rattled, glasses clinked, the chandelier shook. Forks dropped. Voices rose in confusion. What is that? Vanessa hissed, her wine spilling across the white cloth like blood. Richard's grip loosened as he turned to the window. Police reporters. Did you call? The thunder grew until it drowned him out. The lawn outside, lit with spotlights, grass bending under hurricane winds. Curtains snapped against their rods. Guests stumbled to the window, eyes wide. I stood slowly, my chair scraping back. My wrist throbbed, but my voice was calm, deliberate steel. That I said is mine. Every head whipped toward me. Mother's lips parted, her hand trembling against the armrest. Richard stared as though he had misheard. Yours? I opened my bag and pulled out a thick leather folder. I laid it on the table with a solid thud louder than his laptop slam. Pages slid, free contracts, bank statements, articles with my name in bold. Secure Link valued at $250 million. Clara Whitmore, founder and major shareholder. Gasps ricocheted around the table. Vanessa's hand flew to her mouth. Richard snatched a page, scanning it, his face paling with every line. This is fake. It has to be. No, I said. It is the truth you've spent 25 years ignoring. The room spun into chaos, voices shouting, chairs scraping. My mother's eyes brimmed with tears, confusion etched across her face. Clara, is this real? I met her gaze. Yes, Mother, real. And I've arranged for your care, paid in full, the best suite at Heritage Home. You will never want for anything. But as for Richard and Vanessa, I turned my voice cutting like glass. You will never again control me. Or her. Richard slammed the papers down, his voice cracking. You humiliate us in our own home, you dare! Yes, I interrupted, standing taller. I dare. Because you forced me into silence for decades. Because you treated me as worthless. Tonight you will see me as I am, and you will live with the knowledge that the woman you called poor holds the power you worship. The helicopter blades thundered outside, shaking the room, shaking them to their core. For the first time, Richard had no words. For the first time, Vanessa's laughter died on her lips. For the first time, my mother looked at me not with pity, but with awe and maybe regret. The confrontation was over, the verdict had been delivered, and the balance of power had shifted forever. The thunder of the helicopter shook the very bones of the Whitmore estate. The chandelier swayed as though it might crash to the floor. Dishes rattled in their china cabinets and napkins flew like startled birds. Everyone at the table scrambled to the windows, their faces pressed against the glass mouths open in disbelief. The vast machine descended onto the manicured lawn blades, carving through the cold night air, lights flooding the dining room in an eerie white glow. Richard staggered back from the table, his voice strangled. This is a stunt. Some rented toy. You think flashing lights will make you equal to us? I walked to the head of the table, the place my father had once sat, and stood there as the thunder outside began to soften with the slowing of the blades. Not a stunt, I said. That helicopter is mine. My pilot is outside waiting, and I don't need your approval to claim this space any longer. Gasps rippled through the room. Vanessa clutched her sapphire necklace like it could shield her. You're lying! You've always lied! Where would you get money for something like this? I opened the leather folder wider, sliding page after page across the linen tablecloth. Contracts signed by Fortune 500 companies. Patent registrations with my name embossed. Acquisition agreements, valuations, wire transfers. Secure Link. I said, my voice steady. The cybersecurity firm you never asked about. The company I built while you laughed at me. The company I sold for $120 million. I retained 30% ownership. Current valuation, $250 million. The silence was so thick I could hear the tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. Richard's face twisted. Forgery. Clever forgery. You think you can humiliate me with props? I pulled out my phone, again tapped the screen. In seconds, the voice of Denise Harrington, my attorney, filled the room. "This is to confirm," she said crisply, "that Clara Whitmore is the founder and majority shareholder of SecureLink and that she has full authority over her assets. The documentation you see has been filed and verified." The color drained from Vanessa's cheeks. Richard swore under his breath. My mother raised a trembling hand to her mouth, her eyes brimming with tears. "Clara," she whispered all this time. "Yes, Mother," I said softly. "All this time. While you told me I wasn't enough. While Richard shoved me down. While Vanessa laughed. I was building this." I turned to the nurse standing beside her wheelchair. "From tomorrow, Margaret Whitmore will have a private suite at Heritage Home fully paid for the rest of her life. Every need, every comfort, every luxury covered. Not by Richard, not by Vanessa. By me." The nurse nodded. "It's arranged." Gasps broke again across the table. Vanessa clutched at her glass, her voice shrill. You've been planning this. You set us up to look like fools." I met her gaze without blinking. "No. You set yourselves up when you decided cruelty was easier than kindness. Tonight is only the truth finally standing in the light." Richard lunged for the papers, shoving them into a pile. "You'll regret this. You think money makes you powerful? I control this family. I decide what happens to Mother, to this estate, to our name." I smiled cold and sharp. "Not anymore. I've already filed the paperwork. You have no authority over Mother's finances. You have no control over her care. From tonight forward, you are nothing more than her son. The empire you lorded over is gone." His fist crashed onto the table, rattling the wine glasses. "You ungrateful!" The helicopter blades outside thundered again, as if in answer, the sound swallowing his rage. I raised my voice above the roar. "Ungrateful? No, Richard. I am the only grateful one here. Grateful that your contempt taught me resilience. Grateful that your slap drove me out the door and into my own destiny. Grateful that you never believed in me because your disbelief built my fire." Mother sobbed softly, her voice shaking. "Clara, I didn't know. I didn't see." I looked at her, not unkind, but unflinching. "You didn't want to see. But now you cannot unsee." The blades outside slowed to a steady hum, casting shadows across the walls. I gathered the papers back into the folder and straightened. "You called me poor. Tonight you see the truth. I was never poor. I was only underestimated. And that is the last mistake you will ever make about me." The final thrum of the helicopter echoed like a gavel striking wood. Judgment had been delivered, and the Whitmore family, for the first time in their lives, had no appeal. The room pulsed with a stunned silence, the air thick with disbelief. Richard's face mottled red veins straining against his temples, his hands clawing at the papers as though tearing them would make the truth disappear. Vanessa sat rigid, her glass shattered on the table, shards glinting under the chandelier's trimmer. My mother wept softly, her breath rattling in her chest. Richard roared, his voice ragged. "Forgery, manipulation! You staged this, Clara! You tricked us!" He flung a contract across the table, the pages scattering like wounded birds. "No one would invest in you. You're a fraud." I didn't flinch. Every page is notarized, every signature verified. Denise Harrington's name is on those contracts, and she doesn't gamble with lies. I tapped my phone again, the speaker crackling to life. Denise's firm voice rang out. "To anyone questioning these documents, be aware they are legally binding. Attempting to interfere or slander will result in immediate litigation." The room froze. Even Richard's mouth snapped shut. I stepped closer, my heels clicking against the marble, and looked down at him where he stood hunched, clutching the scraps of my folder. "For years you shoved me down. You struck me, silenced me, convinced everyone I was worthless. Tonight the world sees what I am, and what you are." His eyes flashed, but beneath the fury I saw it fear. I reached into the folder again, pulling free a slim packet. "Here," I said, laying it before him. "This is the trust fund I've established for Mother. $10 million locked in her name. It guarantees her the highest care for life." Gasps swept the room. Mother sobbed harder, whispering my name like a prayer. And here, I continued sliding another set of papers across the table, is the court order. "Richard Vanessa, you are legally barred from managing her finances. Your history of gaslighting, coercion, and abuse is well documented." Richard's roar shook the table. "You dare accuse me!" I cut him off. I don't accuse, I prove. I opened my laptop, the screen lighting with video files, recordings from the last 3 months, the way you shouted at Mother, the way you threatened staff. Even tonight's meeting, this entire conversation is recorded. Evidence never blinks. The color drained from his face. Vanessa reached for him, but he shook her off, stumbling back like a cornered beast. "And one more thing," I said, my voice sharp as glass. I lifted another folder. "Evidence of your firm's financial misconduct. Shell accounts, falsified ledgers, siphoned bonuses. I've already forwarded it to the Securities and Exchange Commission. By morning, they'll have your records." The explosion of voices was instant, relatives gasping, Vanessa shrieking, my mother whispering, "No, no, no!" Richard lunged across the table, but 2 of the staff hired by me stepped between us, holding him back. His spit flecked the air. "You vindictive bitch! You'll ruin me!" I leaned forward until my words were inches from his contorted face. "No, Richard, you ruined yourself." I only held up the mirror. Vanessa crumpled into her chair, her mascara streaking as she sobbed. "You've destroyed us. You've destroyed everything." I turned to her, my voice cold but steady. "You destroyed yourself the day you decided cruelty was entertainment. Your husband already knows about your little trust games. When the press prints tomorrow's news, he will see what you are, and you'll find yourself without the luxury you hide behind." She shook her head, denial spilling from her lips, but the terror in her eyes betrayed her. The helicopter outside thudded again, its blades carving judgment into the night. My mother reached out with trembling fingers. "Clara," she whispered, "forgive us. Forgive me. I didn't protect you." I paused. For the first time, my chest ached with something other than fury. I knelt by her chair, took her hand, and whispered, "I forgive you, Mother. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. Richard and Vanessa will face theirs, and I will no longer carry the weight of their cruelty." Richard sagged against the staff, restraining him, the fight draining as reality settled. He muttered curses, but his voice cracked broken hollow. Vanessa covered her face, her sobs the only sound beside the steady hum of the helicopter. I stood gathering my folder. This meeting is over. From tonight forward, this family will live in truth, not lies. I've claimed my place, and you will live with the knowledge that the one you called poor is the one who ended your reign. No one stopped me as I walked to the door, the folder clutched against my chest. Outside, the wind whipped around me, the blades of the helicopter roaring like victory drums. I climbed aboard the estate, shrinking below its grand facade, trembling under the weight of its secrets. For the first time in decades, I felt free. And behind me, Richard and Vanessa sat among the ruins of their arrogance, awaiting the justice already on its way. The morning after the meeting, the Whitmore estate no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a crime scene. Reporters clustered outside the gates, cameras flashing microphones, stretching toward any relative daring to leave. News vans lined the street, their headlines already spinning. Whitmore dynasty in ruin, SEC investigates. Prominent Boston attorney. Forgotten daughter emerges as tech mogul. I watched it all from the penthouse suite I rarely used, sipping coffee as dawn painted the city in pale gold. My phone buzzed, nonstop journalists requesting statements, colleagues congratulating me, investors offering new deals. But the only notifications I read were the ones from my attorney. Richard's accounts frozen. Vanessa's credit cards declined subpoenas issued for the financial records I had exposed. By noon, the fallout began. Richard's law firm released a statement suspending him indefinitely. Within hours, clients fled, terrified their money had been funneled into his shell accounts. Colleagues who once worshipped him distanced themselves, their loyalty evaporating with the scent of scandal. The man who once strutted like a king now faced the prospect of federal charges. Vanessa fared no better. Her husband, the banker she clung to like a life raft, filed for divorce before the day ended. He cited irreconcilable differences, but the gossip pages screamed the truth. He had grown tired of her vanity, and the shame of her family's disgrace gave him the perfect excuse to sever ties. Stripped of his money, she retreated to the guest house of a friend, no diamonds, no gowns, no invitations to the galas where she once preened. "And, Mother?" Margaret called me quietly that week. Her voice cracked softer than I had ever heard it. "Clara," she said, "I don't deserve your kindness. But I am grateful. The suite is beautiful. They treat me with dignity. For the first time, I see what I could not before. I see you. I closed my eyes, listening to the frail woman who had once looked at me only with pity. It's not too late, Mother, I whispered. Not too late to live in truth. She sobbed then, and though my heart ached, I felt no hatred, only release. The wider family reacted with predictable cruelty. Cousins gossiped, aunts called me ruthless, ungrateful, vindictive. But the public saw it differently. Headlines praised me as the woman who had risen from ashes, the underestimated sister who toppled the golden boy. Social media roared with admiration, strangers writing, "She gave them what they deserved. Justice has landed, literally." Richard tried to fight back. He held a press conference, his voice cracking as he insisted I had fabricated evidence that I had always been jealous. But the cameras caught the sweat on his brow, the tremble in his hands. And when the first indictment landed for wire fraud, his words dissolved into smoke. Vanessa attempted sympathy posts online, painting herself as a victim of circumstance. But receipts always surface. Screenshots of her mocking texts, recordings of her condescension at charity events, even footage from the night of the family meeting, all leaked. Public opinion turned vicious. Invitations stopped arriving. She became a pariah at the very luncheons where she once reigned. And me, I walked through it all with silence. Silence was my armor, my weapon. I issued no statements, gave no interviews. I let the evidence speak, because evidence never blinks. One night, weeks later, I returned to the estate, not to gloat, but to collect a few boxes of belongings Mother insisted I take. The gates stood ajar, the lawn unkempt. Richard's car was gone, repossessed. Vanessa's closet had been stripped bare. The chandelier still hung, but the light was dimmer, the air heavier. The house itself seemed to sag under the weight of its lost illusions. I stood in the foyer where portraits of my siblings still adorned the walls, smug smiles immortalized in gilded frames. My photograph was still absent, but I no longer needed it. My legacy lived elsewhere in code, in contracts, in the quiet justice that had finally landed. When I stepped back outside, the night was still. No reporters, no flashing cameras. Just the whisper of leaves across the driveway and the faint memory of rotor blades thundering above. I looked up at the sky and smiled. The Whitmore dynasty had fallen, but I had risen not for revenge alone, but for truth, for justice, for every silenced voice that had ever been told to sit down and stay quiet. The aftermath was not chaos for me, it was clarity, and clarity was worth every scar. The weeks after the fallout were strangely quiet. For the first time in years, I woke without the weight of proving myself pressing down on my chest. The noise of Richard's accusations, Vanessa's laughter, my mother's sighs, all had faded into echoes. In their place was silence, and for the first time, silence didn't mean erasure. It meant peace. I spent mornings walking along the Charles River, the city skyline reflected in the water like a promise. Some days I still felt the old wounds ache, the slap that had sent me out of my father's house, the jeers at the dinner table, the endless dismissals. But with every step, I remembered that those scars had carried me forward, not held me back. Mother called often now. At first, it was awkward, her voice stumbling over words of regret. But slowly, honesty replaced denial. She admitted the favoritism, the gaslighting, the blindness. One afternoon, her voice trembling, she said, "Clara, I don't ask for forgiveness, but I hope you know I see you now. Not just as my daughter, but as the strongest part of this family." I sat on my balcony with the phone pressed to my ear, tears slipping down my cheeks. For decades, I had waited for those words. They didn't erase the past, but they stitched something inside me I thought would never mend. With the money SecureLink had given me, I could have hidden in luxury, but wealth without purpose felt hollow. I kept my apartment modest, my clothes simple. Instead, I built something larger than myself, the Quiet Justice Foundation. Its mission was clear. Provide resources for women trapped in toxic families, survivors of emotional and physical abuse, who had been told they were worthless. We funded legal aid therapy and emergency housing. Within months, our hotline rang daily voices trembling on the other end, women whispering, "I thought I was alone." I told them what I had learned: you are never as powerless as they want you to believe. Evidence never blinks. Silence can be armor, and one day when you rise, rise loudly. The first gala we hosted was nothing like the Whitmore gatherings of my childhood. No chandeliers heavy with pretense, no cruel laughter under crystal glasses. Instead, the hall was filled with women and men whose eyes shone with resilience. Survivors stood at the podium sharing stories that once brought shame but now drew applause. I watched from the crowd, heart swelling, and when they called my name to speak, I felt no fear. I stood before them and said, "For most of my life, my family told me I was nothing. They called me poor, pathetic, powerless. They struck me down when I tried to stand. But power isn't born from their approval. Power is born when you refuse to let cruelty define you. True wealth isn't money, though I have it now. True wealth is in reclaiming your voice, your dignity, your truth." The applause rolled like thunder, but this time it was not the thunder of a helicopter. It was the thunder of community of justice echoing louder than any insult ever could. Later that night, as the hall emptied and the city lights glittered, I stood outside beneath the stars. For years, I had dreamed of vengeance. And yes, I had won that. Richard faced trial. Vanessa faded into obscurity. The dynasty had collapsed. But in the end, what mattered most wasn't their downfall. It was my rise. I closed my eyes, breathed the cool night air, and let the past drift like smoke. My scars would never vanish, but they no longer bound me. They were part of my story, and my story now was one of healing, of purpose, of strength. And to anyone who ever sat at a table and was told to stay quiet, to anyone shoved into silence by the ones meant to love them, I had one message: rise, speak, live in truth. Because when you do, no one can ever call you poor again.